Incidence of civil wars. Kalivas gives us this data. Between 1989 and 2004, there were 118 armed conflicts, only 7 were interstate or international. 111 civil wars and only 7 regular wars between nations. Fearon and Leighton calculated from 45 onwards, from 45 to 99, 25 interstate wars in which 3.3 million people died, and average duration of a war, a standard war, a conventional war, was 3 months. Instead of 25 interstate wars, or in contrast to 25 interstate wars, there were 127 civil wars in this period, of which in which 16.2 million people died, and average duration, and not median duration, was 6 years. So civil wars have been more common in recent times and have lasted longer than conventional wars and have killed more people. Civil wars are the wars of modern era. Right? This is decisive data. There is no doubt, there is no ambiguity here. Civil wars are the wars of modern era. Greed versus grievance is the most cited theory of why civil wars take place. We can go through this. Collier and Hoffler modeled civil wars as an industry in which looting generates profit. Leaders of rebellion are driven by a desire to amass fortunes. Greed drives them. Right? And masses join leaders, for in poor societies there are very few economic opportunities and the so-called opportunity costs are very low. And the concept of opportunity costs in economics is very clearly laid out. Essentially means there's nothing else to do. There are no employment opportunities, so might as well join the civil war. There is risk, all right, but you might get a share of the loot. And the claim was also that given their geographical concentration, natural resources, oil, copper, bauxite, iron ore, natural resources are an especially lootable commodity. Civil wars predominantly erupt in economies highly dependent on natural resource extraction. The northeasterns here would immediately see that this is relevant to their part of the world. Timber, tea, etc. Now, we've already noted that they themselves, that Collier and Hoffler themselves changed their view when they subjected their statistical results to case studies. And why do case studies? Those of you who are research inclined here, why not just collect statistics from all over the world? Why do case studies? Because even if this statistical model predicted all cases of civil war onset perfectly, it would still not be able to tell us much about the process through which these outcomes, war or peace, are generated. Statistics do not give you a sense of the process. Right? Statistics give you outcomes at 2 different points, 3 different points, 5 different points. They don't give you the entire sequence or the process. This sequence of events and the interaction of variables in the statistical model over time that you can analyze through the process is the comparative advantage of case study designs. Qualitative analysis can help us sort out the endogenous from the exogenous. So they did say the distinction between greed and grievance should be abandoned, but everybody even today cites them for the greed model, which they have dropped. And it is one of the ironies of research that even if you have dropped your model, if you're cited more and more, you still are allured to the idea of greater and greater citation. Right? It's one of the ironies of social science research that even if you're cited for wrong reasons, you don't mind being cited, because citation counts. Now, the way a later scholarship dealt with this, the way they then they argued that greed and grievance cannot be separated; they're inextricably fused, but they couldn't quite give an explanation for why that is so, and that is where Professor Stathis Kalivas comes in. He draws a distinction between civil war and civil war violence. A distinction between civil war and civil war violence, which allows him to combine both the fiery rhetoric of civil war ideologues at the macro level, which is about grievances and ideologies, which is about master narratives. Right? Delhi neglects the Northeast. Delhi shabbily treats Kashmiris. Right? That's an ideology. That's an ideology which may be believed by a lot and is very relevant here, he's arguing. So, allows him to combine both the fiery rhetoric of civil war ideologues at the macro level and the everyday pursuit of desires, jealousies and vendettas on the micro ground level. Insertion of your own interests and desires into the larger narrative. Self-interested insertion into the larger ideological narrative. Right? This could be something economic. This could be something like revenge for something that a person did at an earlier time. And that revenge simply inserted. Revenge is not presented as a revenge. Revenge is presented as part of this large rhetoric and large narrative, grand narrative of grievance and injustice and discrimination, etc. Including, incidentally, in his Greek Civil War accounts, there are love feuds that are settled. Love jealousies and feuds that are settled this way. They're inserted into the larger grand narrative of us versus them, injustice, right? Discrimination, and fight against discrimination and fight against injustice, etc. Ideologies tend to produce master narratives into which all sorts of aims, both noble and ignoble, can be inserted by actors. This claim, as we say, first made in the riots literature. We made that claim first, and now it has seriously penetrated civil wars literature, with Kalivas embracing those ideas. So how does the distinction allow him to transcend the binary between greed and grievance? Both are present. Some people are driven by larger narratives, genuinely, honestly driven by the larger narrative, and genuinely believe in it. Others believe in it and still use personal projects. And still others, only personal projects. They have no interest in grand narratives. They would like to use it for their self-interested missions. Right? So he, by proposing a distinction between civil war and civil war violence, he is able to transcend the binary of greed and grievance. Both are present, and sometimes in the same individual. Right? Okay. Then he proposes a novel theory, civil war. Then once he's made this distinction, then he talks about civil war, explanation of civil war violence. And he argues that violence can be defined as a function of control. A very innovative theory, and once it's proposed to you, you'll see why it makes sense. Oftentimes, theories tell us something that seems very intuitive, but we never thought about that. We never wrote about that. We never thought about that. And when it's presented and we respond, oh my God, I should have thought about that. I also studied, I should have thought about it. It didn't occur to me. It's right. So what is a civil war driven by? Or what another way of describing, or driven by, another way of describing a civil war is that there is segmented and fragmented sovereignty. Which is to say, insurgents control some territory, and incumbents, the government, incumbents control some other territory. So it's a fragmented sovereignty. It's a segmented control over territory. Right? Which is a basic description of civil war. Jaffna was controlled by LTT. Right? There were districts in Kashmir that were controlled by militants, but they could never fully control Srinagar. Right? There were villages and parts of Punjab that were controlled by militants, but never Amritsar fully, never Ludhiana fully, never Ambala, etc. Right? And the same would be true of northeastern parts of India. Delhi or its allies in northeastern states never lost control of the entire territory. Insurgents would have some part of the territory, and Delhi and its allies would have some other parts of it. They never lost control of the entire part. Right? So, once that is true, then he argues that shows that violence tends to be absent or is very low in areas where the insurgents or incumbents have a hegemony. And then we'll ask why. Huh? It is selective where either contesting party exercises control but is not fully hegemonous, right? That means it is in control of the territory, but there is still disaffection and dissent. Right? And it is indiscriminate. So three kinds of violence. Absent in certain areas of civil war, selective in certain areas of civil war, and indiscriminate in some other area of civil war. Indiscriminate when no effective control by either party exists, but the possibility of such control cannot be ruled out. Basically, no effective control exists. It's not clear to either party that they are fully in control. Right? Why would this be so? It is selective where either contesting party exercises control but not hegemony. So this concept I'm saying, substantially in control, not fully in control. Right? So area A is substantially in control of incumbents but not entirely. Right? Area B is substantially in control of insurgents but not entirely. Why would there be selective violence and who would be targeted? Selective means somebody is being selected for violence, right? Why would violence be selective and who would be targeted? Why is it selective? Yeah? Because you have control but not full control. Let's call hegemony full control and control substantial control, right? So let's say you control 80-85%, you don't control 15% of the population, right? That 15% population is collaborating either with the government in the insurgent area, or in the incumbent area it's collaborating with the insurgents. That's the people you target. Right? So you want this 80% to become 100%. That is the people you target, and that violence is selective, right? Why would it be indiscriminate when there is no effective control by any party, either party? So area A is neither controlled by insurgents nor by incumbents. Area B is neither controlled by insurgents nor by incumbents. And they're trying to control it. Then, why would it be indiscriminate? Once neither is in control, you really don't know who's on your side, who's not on your side. Certainly you don't have that information as much as you would like. Right? If the information is not available about who is with you and who is not with you, some you can guess. If generally not available, then the form that violence will take is indiscriminate. I only know she's not with me, right? But in this whole area that I'm trying to capture, I know that she's not with me, but I don't know about the rest, who's with me and who's not with me. And the government similarly here is trying to figure out who's with me and who's not with me. So one person not with me, I'll kill her. Right? But the others, what do? So through the violence happens to be indiscriminate in such cases, right? And it sends a message of some kind, right? If I could have, in order for me to be selective in choosing my targets, I have to have proper, accurate information. If I do not have that information, I can't be selective. The only way I can try and establish control is by terrorizing. Right? Do you see the logic? Now you can see this makes sense, huh? This makes sense, but nobody proposed this theory. And then he gives you examples after examples of this, and also his own research on Greek Civil War. He managed to get a lot of Greek Civil Wars in the 1940s. He managed to get access to the libraries, town libraries libraries of towns and villages where the Civil War took place. So he had all kinds of narratives in front of him which he was reading. Right? But you can apply it to Northeast, you can apply it to Kashmir in India, you will see that this pattern would hold. No one has been able to challenge this theory yet. That in a situation of complete control, you don't get violence. In a situation of substantial but not complete control, you get targeted violence. In a situation of no control, you get indiscriminate violence. The worst areas of civil war are areas where neither the incumbents nor the insurgents control the territory. India has followed a three-pronged strategy towards civil war. There is, first of all, a military approach which is called counterinsurgency, to subdue the insurgents physically, militarily. Second, there's always, India always tried an economic approach, more economic resources thrown into the area of insurgency to weaken the support base of insurgents or buy off local elites. Challenge me if I'm wrong. Okay. More money into Kashmir, more money into the Northeast. Try and build roads. Try and make some more projects there. Or simply bribe the local elite. In any case, if you put more resources there, maybe 50% would be siphoned off or something like that. Or 50%, 30%, 40%, but the more resources, public resources are thrown into an area, and they will have to be channeled through local governments or regional governments, and you can start buying off elites that way. 3, a political approach. Persuade the insurgents to run for office, to contest the elections, or come to a dialogue with the government. There is always what is called a second track open, or back track open. Always. Persuading the Hurriyat leaders to contest the elections. Right? The UPA government was using Mamata Banerjee, right? So she could persuade Maoists with whom she had links to run for office. And then if you win, you run the state. The claim is not that you run for office and the Hurriyat has not fallen for it. Maoists have not yet fallen for it. A lot of, not fallen, I would not argue, have not purchased the idea. Right? But in the Northeast, the idea was purchased. Right? And some of the insurgents came to power and ran the government. Now, only democracies would do this, right? When an insurgency breaks out in Indonesia, or when it did under Suharto, this was the primary approach, and this was the occasional approach. This was not the approach. It should, however, be clear that while all three parts of the strategy are normally simultaneously pursued, the insurgents do not accept a dialogue or participate in normal political process if they believe they are winning. A vast literature in insurgencies has developed around this point, and there is a consensus. Groups committed to fighting the state violently do not give up unless forced to, unless they believe they cannot win anymore. Militarily. Those who argue that development is the only or best way to deal with civil wars or insurgencies, for example, Arundhati Roy made this claim about Maoism in central India. Wrote a piece about that. Long piece about that. Those who argue that development is the only or best way to deal with civil wars and insurgencies make a huge mistake. Development is not possible in areas controlled by insurgents. Only in those areas where they have no or uncertain control. Why would those who have built their political base by arguing that the state's resources never reach the needy allow the government to do a better job? That is why insurgents must be militarily subdued before development or governance in areas controlled by them can make a comeback. This is a utopian nonsense that in areas controlled by insurgents, you can weaken them by running a development programs. It's complete nonsense. Why would insurgents who control that area would let you do that? You are not in control of the territory. They have always argued that government has discriminated against you. Why would they let you build roads, run schools, provide better services? No, they won't. It's not in their interest. Right? So, while India does try a threefold strategy, let us be clear that the first part of the strategy, military counterinsurgency, crushing militants, is a necessary, though not sufficient, a necessary component of final peace. The insurgents have to believe they cannot win. This is straightforward what is in international relations called realism. In the international relations field, subfield of political science, the biggest idea is realism. Realism means if you are in a war, right, if you're in a state of war or not in a state of war, but war-like situation, then you cannot have peace unless the adversary is convinced he cannot win that war.